let's talk about tyrants. Well, not only are they mythological figures, but they exist and they tend to be deified. I mean, Stalin was, for all intents and purposes, God the Father in Soviet Russia, although he was pretty much only the worst elements of Old Testament God, who was, constantly smiting people and wiping out populations and doing all sorts of things that seemed to be quite nasty. But nonetheless, people worshipped him in many ways, and he's a representation of just exactly what goes wrong when things really go wrong, when people stop paying attention and when they all lie. Because one of the things that characterized the communist state was that no one ever got to say anything they actually believed, ever. And that was partly because 1 out of 3 people was an informer, which meant if you had a family of 6 people, 2 of them were informing on the government about you, and that included your own children. And if you were an informer, you were often amply rewarded by the state, so that if you lived in an overcrowded apartment building with 3 families in the same flat, and you informed on, the woman down the hall that you didn't like, she got shipped off to the old concentration camp, and you got her apartment. And so that was a lovely society, and it only killed about 30 million people between 1919 and 1959. So that's what happens when the archetypal structure gets tilted badly, when people forget that they have a responsibility to fulfill as citizens, as awake citizens who are capable of stating the truth, and the archetype shifts, so there's nothing left of the great father except the tyrant, and let's not have that happen. I mean, the one on the right is really interesting because consciously or unconsciously, there's Stalin surrounded by what is, for all intents and purposes, fire. He looks like Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty when she shows up at Aurora's christening. She puts her arms up in the air and green fire surrounds her. It's like he's surrounded by fire, and there's Lenin above him who's like king of the fiery realm, and that's for sure. So I mean, all the terrors that happened in the Soviet Union didn't start under Stalin, they started under Lenin, and Stalin was definitely Lenin's legitimate son, let's put it that way. So, this is another example of the tyrannical element of the Great Father and the sorts of things that can happen. I mean, I kind of got an evil kick out of this ad that was quite old. It's kitschy in some sense, and it shows. I don't think that's something you'd ever see in a magazine today. 10 unusual stamps showing evil dictator. Well, fair enough. I mean, that's what he was, and that's the consequence, and that's just a tiny bit of the consequence, because the Nazis wiped out a very large number of people, often using compassion as a justification. So when they went after the mentally ill and the terminally ill, and those whose intelligence was compromised for biological reasons, and those who were too old, they basically justified it by saying that the enforced euthanasia was merciful, and that you were actually being a good person by complying with the requirements. And so, something to think about. More mythological representations, I like these quite a bit. So there's Hitler as, knight of the faith, essentially, with, I suppose that's a recreation of the Christian Holy Spirit dove, except it's an eagle, which is a bird of prey, and a what do you call those things? A scavenger, right? So that's kind of interesting. But that's Hitler as knight of the blood, roughly speaking. And this is an Allied war poster, essentially, that assimilates the Nazis to poisonous snakes. And we don't like poisonous snakes very much, and it's probably because they've been preying on us for approximately 20 million years, because snakes and primates, humans in particular, co-evolve.